אנחנו מוצאים את הספור עם זרה שמשון?
האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה? מה? כן.
Erev Tov, good evening, everyone. We're in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha Bamidbar, and we are going to do Os Hey or Drush Hey. So that's section number 5. And to start with, we're going to take a look at 2 psukim in Parsha Bamidbar. This is Perek Gimel in sefer Bamidbar, psukim Mem Daled and Mem Hey. Vayadaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, and Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, Kach es haLeviyim, take the Levites, take the Leviim, Tachas kol bechor bivnei Yisrael, in place of all of the firstborn of the children of Israel, of the people of Israel, ve'es behemas haLeviim, and take the animals of the Leviim, Tachas behemtam, in place of the animals of the firstborn, V'hoyu li haLeviim, and the Leviim will be to me. Ani Hashem, I am Hashem. So this is a very important pasuk in the sense that it teaches us that the Leviim replaced the firstborn. There was as we'll see, there was an expectation that the firstborn, and the precedent was that the firstborn son in each family would be the one to kind of be a special spiritual guide for the household. And if there were korbanos to be brought, it would be the firstborn son who would bring the korbanos. And here we see that the Leviim, Hashem has decided to replace the firstborn sons with the Leviim, and that leads to a whole discussion here in Parshas Bamidbar. So let's see what the Zera Shimshon has to say about this. Oshe, section 5, Medrash, the Medrash Rabbah, al pasuk kaches haLeviim. On the pasuk we just looked at, by the way, you'll see there's a typo right there. It says Perek Gimel pasuk chaf hey. It should be, of course, pasuk mem hey. So on the pasuk we just looked at, kaches haLeviim, take the Leviim and replace the firstborn sons with the Leviim. So the Medrash Rabbah says, Lama tziva haKadosh Baruch Hu. Why did Hashem command lifdos bechore Yisrael b'Leviim, to redeem or to switch the firstborn sons of Yisrael with the Leviim? Why did Hashem command to do that? Shemitechilas brioso shel olam hayu habechoros makrivim. From the beginning of the world, the Medrash Rabbah tells us, the firstborn sons used to be responsible for bringing the korbanos. Adam Harishon Hikriv. Adam Harishon is the first example of a firstborn who brought korbanos. Shehaya Bechoro Shel Olam. He was the firstborn son of the entire world. He was the first person of the world, the first to created human being, and therefore he was considered a Bechor, a firstborn, and he was the one to offer korbanos. V'lovash bigdei kahuna, and he also wore special clothing like a kohen would wear. Kivon shemes Adam, when Adam was going to die, masran l'sheis, he gave over the responsibility of bringing korbanos and the special bigdei kahuna to his son Sheis. V'sheis l'misushelach, and Sheis gave them over to misushelach. U'misushelach leNoach, and misushelach gave them over to Noach. V'Noach l'Shem, and Noach gave them to Shem. Now the Medrash Rabbah asks a question: V'chi Shem haya habachor? Was Shem in fact a firstborn son? V'halo Yefes haya habachor? Yefes was actually the firstborn son. Elo lefi sheshalsheles avos yotzas mimenu, but since the 3 avos, the chain of the 3 avos, Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, all came from the line, were destined to come from the line of Shem. That's why Shem was given the responsibility that would normally go to the firstborn, normally would have gone to the firstborn son of Noach Yefes, but it was given to Shem because the avos were going to come from him. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from the Medrash Rabbah. Now, this piece in the Medrash Rabbah, if you have an opportunity to take a look at it, actually is much longer then the discussion is much longer. This is only a paraphrase, or it's an excerpt, but some pieces are missing, because in the Medrash Rabbah itself, it mentions more people, and it goes on after Shais to mention more people, and it also brings psukim to support the different things that are mentioned here. For example, how do we know that Adam HaRishon brought a korban? We don't see that in the Torah. And how do we know that Mesushelach and other people brought korbanos? So it brings psukim to support these ideas and these things that are mentioned here. So, but basically what's being said to us is that the idea of a firstborn being special, being sanctified, being dedicated to being given responsibilities of bringing korbanos and of having a special spiritual role, that goes all the way back to Brias HaOlam, to the creation of the world. That's not something that started with the Jewish people. Okay, let's continue. Kosher. This is difficult. The Mikan Mashma, from here, from this piece in the Medrash Rabbah, it implies shekedushas habechoros, the holiness of the firstborn, hayusam mitchilas brias haolam. It existed from the beginning of the creation of the world. That's exactly what it says. Ve'hakosav omer, but we have a pasuk in our parsha which says, Ki li kol bechor b'vnei Yisrael ba'adam u'va'behema. To me are all of the firstborn amongst the Jewish people in both humans and animals. B'yom hakosi, on the day that I struck, kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, all of the firstborn among the in the land of Egypt. Hikdashti osam li, I sanctified them to me. Shenira, and this pasuk makes it appear, shekedushas habechoros shel Yisrael, that the holiness of firstborn Jewish men, lo hitchila, it did not begin ela b'yetzias Mitzrayim, except during the experience of the Exodus from Egypt, shehika bechorehem, when Hashem struck the firstborn Egyptians. So here we have a very straightforward, clear question, because the Zera Shimshon is showing us that there's an apparent contradiction between a statement that he opened with from the Medrash Rabbah, which implied that the idea of a firstborn being dedicated to bring korbanos and to have a special relationship with Hashem existed all the way from Brias HaOlam. And then he brought a pasuk. It's hard to argue with a pasuk, even for the Medrash Rabbah. Then he brought a pasuk from the Torah, which seemingly clearly states that the firstborn Jewish men only began to have a special role and only began to be sanctified during the Exodus from Egypt, way after the Brias HaOlam, obviously. So which one is it, so to speak? The Zera Shimshon's question is here, his implied question is, or his tacit question is, which one is it? Did firstborn Jews have a kedusha and a specialness all the way back from Brias HaOlam, according to seemingly in line with the Medrash Rabbah, or did they only receive their special role and their special sanctification during the experiences of Yetzias Mitzrayim? Let's continue. Top of the next column. V'nakti medrash, and let us begin with another statement from the Medrash Rabbah. Let's bring another Medrash Rabbah into the mix. This is the from Sefer Shmos. Excuse me. Al pasuk hachodesh hazeh lochem, on the pasuk where it says, "This month is to you the first of the months." And that, of course, is a reference to Nisan, and it's the first of the month in the Jewish calendar of the holidays. So the Medrash says, Davar acher, another thing, B'ni Bechori Yisrael. Hashem states, Yisrael is my firstborn son. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu leParo. So the Medrash says, this is what Hashem said to Paro about the firstborn status of Bnei Yisrael, meaning this is what Hashem intended to convey to Paro when he said the words, my firstborn son is Bnei Yisrael. Iyata Yodeya, do you not know, Pharaoh? Kama chibavti habechoros, how much I love the firstborn. Shekasafti b'torasi, I wrote in my Torah, Lo savod b'vechor shorecha, do not work, do not do labor with your firstborn ox. Even I love firstborns. I love the concept of firstborn so much that I forbade the Jewish people from doing menial labor or regular work with a firstborn ox. V'chol ha'over bohem, and anyone who transgresses this law and does labor with a firstborn ox, din hu sheyiloke. It is the law of my Torah that he will be struck. So Hashem is saying to Paro, didn't you realize who you were messing with here? You're going to enslave the Jewish people who I consider my firstborn son. Even a firstborn ox can't be worked with and forced to do labor, and you're trying to enslave the whole Jewish people. You're going to be, so you have to be punished. V'koshe, the Zera Shimshon says, this is difficult. This statement in the Medrash Rabbah that we just read from sefer from Shmos Rabbah is difficult. Sheparo hayayochel litaretz, because Paro could have been able to answer. Now we'll see that this is not, it's unlikely that Paro would have responded in the way that we're going to bring up here. But this is what the Zera Shimshon says. Paro, had he been a Torah scholar, could have responded. Excuse me. Velomar, and Paro could have said, Adarabba, just the opposite. Yeshli raya lehefech. I have a proof to the opposite. You're saying that God considers the firstborn, or I should say, God is trying to convey to me that the Jewish people should be considered and treated like his firstborn son, and that's a big deal? No, I'm going to bring you a proof from your Jewish sources of the Medrash Rabbah that being a firstborn is actually a bad thing. It puts a child on a lower level. The Medrash Rabbah, Parshas Toldos, because in the Medrash Rabbah and Parshas Toldos, so now we have another quote from the Medrash Rabbah, but this one is from Bereshis on Parshas Toldos. Amrina, and we say, Lama Yotza Esav Techila. Why did Esav come out first? Right? Why? The Medrash Rabbah asks, why didn't Hashem, if he wanted Yaakov to be the firstborn and treated as the firstborn and considered the firstborn, why didn't he arrange for Yaakov to come out first? Why did Esav come out first? Medrash Rabbah answers, Kedei she Yotzahu, v'yotza saryuso imo, in order that Esav should come out first and take out the impurities with him. And we'll see what that means. Omer Rabbi Abahu said, Kehadein parvita. This is like I actually do not know what the word parvita means. I wasn't able to find a translation, but I think in the context it means a bath attendant. So that's what we'll go with. Like this bathroom attendant, shehu mishatef es hamerchatz, he cleans out the shower house, the bathhouse first, ve'acher kach marchitz es beno shel melech. And afterwards, he brings in the son, the prince, the son of the king, to be allowed to shower or to bathe. So a shower house attendant would make sure to get the shower house in absolutely pristine condition before inviting the prince in to shower and bathe there. Kach lama yotza Esav techila. That explains why Esav came out first, meaning that there is an idea, as the Zera Shimshon will explain it coming up in the next paragraph. There's an idea that there was a certain element or impurity that needed to be cleared out, so to speak. And Esav, by coming out first specifically, was able to do that. He came out and cleared out that impurity. And then Yaakov came out in a more pristine type situation. V'im kain, and if so, Adarabba, just the opposite from what we said above, Habachor tefei gora. The firstborn should be considered worse than the next child, not better. It shouldn't be better to be a firstborn. It's worse to be the firstborn. It's better to be the child that follows the firstborn, the children that come out after the firstborn has come out and removed the impurities. And again, we'll see what impurities we're talking about in a moment. That's a mystical concept, which we'll see. But the what we've learned here is that there seems to be a difference of an opinion in the Midrashim about whether or not it's a wonderful, special thing to be a Bechor, a firstborn, or is it actually a bad thing to be a firstborn? And kind of as the language he uses here, tefei gora, it's a inferior type thing to be the Bechor, as the Medrash is explaining why Esav came out first. So this Medrash on its own doesn't answer any questions for us, but it does give us some material for the Zera Shimshon to build on as he begins to do now. Next paragraph. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, De'in hachinami. We have to concede shahabachor yeshlo mitchilas habriya yoser chashivus. We have to accept the idea, which we saw in the first paragraph and in the first piece from the Medrash Rabbah, that firstborn sons have a special chashivus, of special importance and prominence and a special role, and that goes all the way back to the Brias HaOlam, to the creation of the world. Ella, but kishekilkol Chava v'hitil bo hanachash zuhama, when Chava made a mistake and the snake, the Nachash, the Nachash of Gan Eden, not just the regular snake, of course, was able to put into her a zuhama, an impurity, niskalkalu hadoros hadboyim v'nifgamu. The future generations were damaged and were impaired. Ubiprat habonim bechorim, specifically firstborn sons, more than other children, sheshoa vim zuhamas imosam, because they absorbed this impurity of their mother. In each succeeding generation, the firstborn son of each mother absorbed this zuhama, this impurity that went all the way back to Chava and the Nachash, absorbed it more than the children that came later. The firstborn son who came out of the womb first absorbed more of this, and it had more of an impact on a firstborn than it did on other children, but it impacted all human beings. Umnam, however, achar kach, afterwards, b'shibud Mitzrayim, during the servitude in Egypt, nitharu, the people were purified. The Jews who went through the servitude in Egypt were purified. Af al pi shelo nifsaka hazuhama legamre, even though this impurity dating back to the time of the of Adam and Chava. So even though that impurity was not completely removed, ad mamad Har Sinai, until the Jewish people stood at Har Sinai to receive the Torah, kinoda, as is well known. So the Zera Shimshon is saying that step one is to accept absolutely that from the Brias Olam, from the beginning of the world, firstborn sons in each family had a special role and a special significance and a special closeness to Hashem. However, all people, and most specifically, all people, but most severely, firstborn sons were affected by this zuhama, this impurity that was transferred down from generation to generation. So it's kind of saying, put an asterisk next to the idea of the specialness of the firstborn, because yes, they were special, they were holy, they were dedicated, but they, like all of humanity, had this zuhama, had this impurity. Only the Jewish people who went through the Shibud Mitzrayim, who went through the Exodus from Egypt, however, were purified to a great extent, to a very large extent, not completely, but to a very large extent, were purified from this impurity because of the experiences of the shibud, of the servitude, and therefore that was much of this impurity, the greater part of this impurity was removed. Let's continue. Ukemoshe kosfu rov meforshei Torah, and like most of the commentators on the Torah, ubichlolem hazera b'yorech, and included in them is a commentary of the Zera b'yorech, say, the Siba Shibud Mitzrayim, the whole purpose of the servitude in Egypt, it was to purify the Jewish people, Bekor HaBarzel, in the cauldron in the iron cauldron, like we would purify a precious metal in a cauldron. The Jewish people were purified in the iron cauldron of servitude in Egypt. In order that they could fulfill their destiny to receive the Torah. They needed that experience. Sha'al yedei chet Adam harishon, because through the chet of Adam harishon nichnasa zuhama, this impurity entered bechol hadoros, in all generations. V'hutzrachu leired Mitzrayim, and the Jews and the Jewish people were therefore required to go down to Egypt lezache chachomer, to purify their material, bechor habarzel, in the iron cauldron. Ubimamad Har Sinai, and when the Jewish people, when Bnei Yisrael came to stand at Har Sinai, Posca Mikol Vikol, every bit of the remaining Zuhama was removed. Ad Kan Lashono, until here is a quote from the Zera B'Yorech. And so we see, excuse me, we see the Zera Shimshon is outlining for us historical steps that are tremendously important. The beginning step, the origin of the Bechor, of the firstborn, having importance, Chashivas, as the Zera Shimshon, the term he used, started at Brios HaOlam. And then, but also that came along with it, the Zuhama, the impurity, that came along all the way until the Jews, being the only ones of all humankind, were purified of this Zuhama, of this impurity, through the harsh and prolonged experience of servitude in Mitzrayim. And then the point of Har Sinai removed, that standing at Har Sinai removed the last of the impurity that the Jews suffered from all the way back from the beginning of human history. Let us continue. Ve'in hachinami, bottom of the second column. Ve'in hachinami shekeshenolad Yaakov adayin lo posca hazuhama. And we need to concede that when Yaakov Avinu was born, this impurity had still not been removed, right? We know it wasn't even partially removed until the Shibud Mitzrayim, till the servitude in Egypt, which Yaakov didn't experience, of course. And we also know that it wasn't completely removed until Har Sinai. Umishum hachi yotza Esav techila. And that's why at the time of Yaakov Avinu's birth, Esav had to come out first. As much as Hashem, so to speak, Kaviyachol might have wanted Yaakov to come out first and just naturally be the Bechor, no, Esav had to come out first in order to take away more of the Zuhama, Kidilakaman Besamach, as we stated above previously. Ubedoros Harishonim, and in the early generations, Hayu Makrivim Hatzadikim Shabachol Dor Vador, the righteous ones in each family, in each generation, would be the ones to bring the korbanos. Lefisha al yedei ma'asehem hatovim, because of through their good actions, their righteous actions, hayu mitahari mizuhamasam, that made them somewhat purified from the impurity. Kigon sheis, for example, sheis shelo haya bechor klal. He could not be considered a firstborn in any way, right? When we think about sheis, we need to, of course, remember that he had two older siblings, Cain and Hevel. I was about to say Adam and Chava. Adam and Chava were the parents, and they had, of course, Cain and Hevel. So Sheis wasn't a Bechor, couldn't be considered a Bechor in any way. And yet he was the one that the Medrash Rabbah told us brought the korbanos for the family because he was considered a tzaddik, the most righteous. V'chein Shem, and so too Shem ben Noach, the son of Noach, was not the Bechor. Ela shehoyu hayoser chashuvim. They were the most prominent members of the family, and in the sense of being the most righteous. Now, just as an aside, obviously, had Hevel not been killed, it's very likely that we see in the Torah clearly his korban was accepted by Hashem readily, and so he might have been the one to be the most righteous and to be able to bring korbanos for the family. He was killed. Cain was the murderer. So things ultimately came to Sheis, who was the most righteous. Ume'ata HaKadosh Baruch Hu sholach lomar laparo. And from now we understand what message Hashem was sending to Paro, as discussed in the Medrash Rabbah on Shmos that the Zera Shimshon quoted above. B'ni b'chori Yisrael. The Jewish people are my firstborn son. Klomar, this means to say, she'ata Yisrael nitaharu mizu hamasam. The Jewish people, Bnei Yisrael, have been purified from the impurity. You, Paro, thought you could ask a question from what the Medrash said about Esav and the Bechor and the firstborn being an inferior role? No, because the Jews suffered under your servitude and under your enslavement, they have been purified from the impurity. V'ru'uyim lehi karei banim, and they are fit to be called my children. V'od, and more so, me'achar shenitaru heim, after they have been purified, bechorim shenishar bahem, the firstborn sons who remain among them, hachashivos haro'oi lebechor, they continue to have the importance and the prominence that's always been given to the firstborn son. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk in Tehillim says, and this is a pasuk in referring to David himself, Af ani bechor et nehu. The pasuk quotes Hashem saying, I will even consider David a firstborn son. Now, of course, we know David was not the firstborn son in his family. And when Shmuel Hanavi came to pick the one to anoint, Yishai showed him the oldest and the next and the next and the next. And then once they got down to the bottom, they had to go find David HaMelech. They had to go find David so Shmuel could appoint him as the next king. So he was very far from being HaBechor, but Hashem says, I'm going to treat him like a Bechor. Shehu Lashon Chashivus. It's a language of prominence, of righteousness and righteousness. Shaharei Hatam, Shahabechoros Makrivim, because the reason firstborn sons used to be the ones designated to bring korbanos for each family, al korchach tzarech lomar, you are compelled to say, lefi shahayu yoser chashuvim. It's because they were the most prominent ones in general in the family, and the Zera Shimshon has already equated chashivas, the term chashivas here, with righteousness, with acts of righteousness. So they were the most prominent, i.e. righteous in the family. That has to be the reason that the firstborn were given the responsibility and the privilege of bringing korbanos. Shahareke shahakoton sheba'achim hayoser choshev, because we saw right from the beginning in the first paragraph in the Medrash Rabbah on Bamidbar that when there was a child who was more choshev than his older siblings, more righteous, more prominent, Hu hamakriv, he is the one who brought korbanos. Kemoshe matzinu b'Shem ben Noach, as we found clearly in the case of Shem ben Noach. Shem was not the firstborn. Yefes was the firstborn, but Shem was designated to be the makriv and to be treated like the bechor of the family, of Noach's family at that time. So clearly, it's the most righteous child. We're going to stop here. There's more to go, as you can see. But I just want to stop here and do a quick recap. So the Zera Shimshon has shown us that the whole issue of a bechor, of a firstborn, is more complicated and a deeper issue than certainly might meet the eye. We have a pasuk that's a very famous pasuk about Hashem sanctifying the firstborn of Bnei Yisrael at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, at the time of the Exodus from Egypt, when he struck the firstborn, the 10th Makkah. And so the Zera Shimshon assumes that many of us might think that's the whole story, but he's teaching us to know that's not the whole story. The truth is that the special role of the firstborn predates the Yetzias Mitzrayim tremendously, and it goes all the way back to the Brias HaOlam. But even in the chain of the Bechor that we see starting with Adam HaRishon and the Brias HaOlam, we have to realize there was an impurity involved that was also coming down generation to generation. And we have to realize, as he's taught us, as Zera Shimshon has taught us, that sometimes there were exceptions to the rule. And it wasn't Dafka firstborn son. Sometimes a child who was not a firstborn son was appointed as the makrib, to be considered like the bechor, and became the one to bring korbanos for the family, and there are several examples of that, and that we see clearly from the Medrash itself. So this idea that the firstborns were already special, but they carried with them impurity, that carried on from Brias HaOlam until the Shibud Mitzrayim, which removed most of the Zuhama, as Zera Shimshon said, and then Ma'amar Har Sinai removed it completely. And then if we go on in the piece, the Zera Shimshon will, of course, bring up the psukim that we all know and the midrashim that we've probably heard that when the Bechor, the firstborns, participated in the Chet HaEgel, that's when Hashem said, I can no longer continue having the firstborn sons have the special role that now I'm going to switch over to the Levium. And it was the Levium and the Kohanim that merited and were given the responsibility to work first in the Mishkan and later in the Beis HaMikdash, and in the place of the firstborn sons who could have had that role had they not participated in the Chet HaEgel. Yasher koach to everyone for joining us tonight. We look forward to learning again in the Zera Shimshon on next week's Parsha.